On the morning of June 20th, 2001, the quiet home in Houston, Texas, looked like any other. A modest house in a peaceful neighborhood. Inside, 5 young children started their day, unaware that within moments, their world would be forever changed. Their mother, Andrea Yates, had spent years caring for them, feeding them, dressing them, tucking them into bed with bedtime stories. A devoted mother by all appearances. Yet, that morning, she walked into the bathroom, turned on the water, and made a decision that would shock an entire nation. One by one, she held her children close. Their small hands reached for her, trusting, familiar. They had always known her as the woman who kissed their scraped knees, who whispered comforting words when nightmares came. But that day, there was no comfort, no reassurance, only silence, broken by the sound of water splashing against porcelain. Minutes later, Andrea picked up the phone. Her voice was calm, her words deliberate. "I just killed my kids," she told the operator. It was a confession that sent shockwaves across the country. How could a mother, someone who brought life into the world, be capable of something so horrifying? Was she driven by something beyond her control? Or was there another truth buried beneath years of struggle, warning signs, and desperate cries for help that no one truly heard? The case of Andrea Yates was unlike anything the courts had seen before. The details, the trial, the debates that followed, it all led to one of the most controversial verdicts in legal history. This was not just about one crime. It became a turning point in discussions about mental illness, the limits of the law, and how far the human mind can go before it breaks. But before we get to that, let's go back to the beginning, to the moments leading up to that morning, to the signs that were missed, to the truth that no one saw until it was too late. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank you, my amazing viewers, for watching and supporting Crime Stories documentaries. Your engagement and feedback means so much. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a gripping true crime story. And please share your thoughts in the comment section. Now, let's get back to the case. Long before the tragedy that made headlines, Andrea Yates was just a little girl growing up in Houston, Texas. Born on July 2nd, 1964, she was the youngest of 5 children. Her parents, devoted and hardworking, raised their family in a stable home. Andrea was quiet, intelligent, and known for her strong work ethic. She excelled in school, where her teachers saw her as a bright student who rarely got into trouble. Despite her reserved nature, she had a deep sense of responsibility. Even as a child, she looked out for others, always striving to do what was right. She participated in swimming and excelled in her studies, especially in math and science. She was not the type to seek attention, but those who knew her described her as kind and thoughtful. After high school, Andrea pursued a career in nursing. She attended the University of Texas Health Science Center and became a registered nurse in 1986. Her years in the medical field reinforced her caring nature. She was dedicated, capable, and respected by her colleagues. But despite her success, she longed for something more, something deeper. That longing led her to Rusty Yates. Andrea met Rusty in 1989. He was an engineer at NASA, ambitious and intelligent. The two quickly connected, and their relationship moved fast. Within months, they were deeply in love. Rusty admired Andrea's quiet strength, her dedication to her beliefs, and her nurturing nature. She saw in him a partner who shared her values and dreams for the future. In 1993, they married. Their life together started with promise, filled with faith and devotion. The couple had strong religious beliefs, following the teachings of a preacher named Michael Warnicki. His sermons emphasized a strict, almost rigid form of Christianity, one that focused heavily on personal sacrifice and the idea that parents had a responsibility to raise as many children as possible to serve God. Andrea and Rusty took these teachings to heart. They decided early in their marriage that they would welcome as many children as possible. Their home was not just a place for love and laughter. It was a place of faith, discipline, and unwavering commitment to their beliefs. At first, everything seemed perfect. They settled into their roles, Rusty as the provider, Andrea as the caregiver. When their first child, Noah, was born in 1994, Andrea embraced motherhood wholeheartedly. More children followed. John in 1995, Paul in 1997, Luke in 1999, and finally, Mary in 2000. But with each child, something changed. The woman who had once been confident, strong, and devoted began to struggle in ways no one fully understood. Motherhood was never easy, but for Andrea, it became something more than exhaustion or stress. It was a weight that grew heavier with each passing year. After the birth of her fourth child, Luke, she experienced her first major breakdown. She became withdrawn, overwhelmed by a sadness she couldn't explain. She stopped eating, stopped speaking for long periods, and seemed lost in her own mind. Then, one day, she held a knife to her throat, ready to end her own life. Rusty intervened just in time, and she was rushed to the hospital. Doctors diagnosed her with severe postpartum depression and psychosis, a condition that caused delusions, paranoia, and a complete detachment from reality. She was prescribed medication and underwent treatment, and for a time, she seemed to improve. But the warning signs were there. The doctors had strongly advised against having more children, fearing that another pregnancy could worsen her condition. Rusty, believing in faith over medical advice, insisted they continue growing their family. In 2000, Andrea gave birth to their fifth child, Mary. This time, the darkness came faster. She became even more withdrawn, barely speaking to anyone. She stopped caring for herself. She refused to eat, barely slept, and seemed to drift between moments of lucidity and deep confusion. She was hospitalized again, this time in a psychiatric facility where she was given antipsychotic medication. But the cycle continued, brief moments of improvement followed by rapid decline. Despite everything, Rusty believed she just needed more support. He encouraged her to push through, to rely on faith. He moved the family into a motorhome, believing a simpler life would ease her burden. But isolation only made things worse. Andrea's condition deteriorated. She had visions. She believed she was failing her children, that she was a terrible mother. She became convinced that the only way to save them, from what she couldn't fully explain, was to take their lives. No one knew just how close she was to the edge. Until June 20th, 2001. By early 2001, Andrea was no longer the woman she once was. The bright, hard-working nurse and devoted mother had faded, replaced by someone unrecognizable, even to herself. Her days were filled with silence. She often sat motionless for hours, staring at nothing. When she did speak, her words were flat, empty. She barely ate, barely slept, and often refused to care for herself. Her hair, once neatly maintained, became unkempt. Her weight dropped. She avoided eye contact. It was as if she were slipping away, piece by piece. Her thoughts had turned dark. She had begun speaking about the devil, about evil forces working through her, about sins she could not atone for. She believed she was responsible for something terrible, though she couldn't explain what. She also feared that her children were in danger, not from an outside threat, but from something within herself. The warning signs were everywhere. Not long after Mary's birth, Andrea was hospitalized again. She was given Haldol, a strong antipsychotic drug that helped stabilize her mind. For a while, she seemed to improve. She started eating again. She could hold conversations. She even managed to smile. But when Rusty and the doctors saw progress, they made a decision that would prove fatal. Her medication was reduced. It didn't take long for her condition to deteriorate. By March 2001, she had stopped talking almost entirely. She wrote disturbing notes about being a bad mother. She told Rusty she needed to be punished, that she was not a good wife, that she was failing their children. She even spoke about hurting them, though Rusty dismissed it, believing she would never do such a thing. Then came the bathtub incident. One afternoon, Andrea filled the bathtub with water and sat beside it, staring into the still surface. When Rusty found her, she wouldn't explain why she had done it. But something in her expression alarmed him. It was as if she were waiting for something. Rusty demanded answers. She finally muttered, I just thought about it. He immediately called her psychiatrist. This time, Andrea was admitted to Devereux Psychiatric Hospital. She stayed there for 10 days, but it was not enough. Upon her release, her doctors strongly warned Rusty she needed constant supervision. She was still a danger to herself. Rusty listened. For a while, Andrea's doctors had been clear. She needed to stay on Haldol. She needed strict monitoring. And above all, she should never be left alone with the children. At first, Rusty followed these instructions. He arranged for his mother, Andrea Yates, to stay with Andrea during the day while he was at work. But over time, he became convinced that she was doing better. He believed that Andrea just needed encouragement, that pushing her toward normalcy would help her recover. So he made a choice. On the morning of June 20th, 2001, Rusty decided to leave Andrea alone for an hour. Just an hour. He reasoned that she needed to learn to handle the kids on her own again. He was supposed to be gone from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. By the time he returned, everything had changed. The day began like any other. At 8:40 a.m., Rusty left for work, reminding Andrea that his mother would arrive in an hour. He kissed her goodbye, unaware that this would be the last time he saw his children alive. Inside the house, Andrea moved methodically. She waited until Rusty's car disappeared down the street. Then she walked to the bathroom. She turned the faucet and watched as the tub filled with cold water. The sound echoed in the empty house. Once it was full, she walked out into the hallway. The children were scattered throughout the house playing, watching TV, unaware of what was about to happen. She started with John. The 5-year-old was in the kitchen, eating cereal. He didn't resist when his mother took his hand and led him to the bathroom. He had no reason to be afraid. She had bathed him many times before. But this time, when they reached the tub, she pushed him under the water. John struggled, kicking, clawing, trying to reach the surface. But Andrea held him down with unnatural strength. His movement slowed, then stopped. She gently lifted him from the water and laid him on the bed. Then she went for Paul. One by one, she did the same to each of them. Luke, Mary, then Noah. Noah, the oldest at 7, realized what was happening. When she grabbed him, he ran. He made it to the living room before she caught him. He screamed for help, but there was no one to hear him. He fought harder than the others. But in the end, he was no match for his mother. When it was done, Andrea placed their lifeless bodies on the bed. She covered them with a sheet. Then she picked up the phone and called 911. Her voice was calm. I just killed my children. Then she called Rusty. It's time, she told him. You need to come home. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply waited. Do you believe Rusty Yates should have done more to protect his children, or was he also a victim of this tragedy? Share your thoughts in the comment section. A few minutes later, Officer David Knapp arrived at the Yates residence in Houston, Texas. Andrea was waiting at the door, soaking wet. Her clothes clung to her body, and her short brown hair dripped with water. Her face was eerily blank. When the officer asked what was wrong, Andrea quietly replied, I just killed my children. The officer pushed past her into the house, and what he found was beyond comprehension. The lifeless bodies of the Yates children, Noah 7, John 5, Paul 3, Luke 2, and Mary 6 months, were lined up on the bed, still damp from the water. The youngest, baby Mary, was left floating in the bathtub. Andrea did not resist arrest. She was placed in handcuffs and escorted to the police station, where she soon gave a full confession. She told investigators she had drowned her children to save them from Satan, believing she was a terrible mother and that if she let them live, they would grow up to be doomed to hell. She explained how she had locked up the family dog to keep it from interfering. She had methodically drowned each child, starting with the youngest. When Noah, her eldest, saw his siblings floating lifelessly, he tried to run, but Andrea caught him. He fought, but she overpowered him. His last words were heartbreaking. "I'm sorry." By the time Rusty Yates arrived home, the street was filled with police cars. He saw Andrea sitting in the back of a patrol car, staring blankly ahead. When he asked officers what had happened, he collapsed in horror as the truth unfolded. Andrea was taken into custody and booked at the Harris County Jail, where she was held without bail. She never asked about her children. She never showed any emotion. Her mugshot from that day remains one of the most haunting images of the case, her face blank, her eyes dark and empty. The world was about to witness one of the most shocking trials in American history. Andrea was taken to court, and on the first appearance, the courtroom was silent as Andrea Yates was led to her seat. The world had already formed its opinion about her. To many, she was a monster. A woman who had taken the lives of her 5 innocent children in cold blood. The prosecution wasted no time in painting that image. The trial began in February 2002, less than a year after the murders. The state of Texas charged her with capital murder, seeking the death penalty. The prosecution argued that she had known exactly what she was doing. She had waited until Rusty left for work. She had methodically drowned each child, ensuring there were no survivors. The jury listened to recordings of her 911 call and police interrogation. They watched hours of footage where she spoke with little emotion, recounting every detail of what she had done. The prosecution called Dr. Park Dietz, a forensic psychiatrist, as their key witness. He testified that Andrea was not only aware of her actions, but had even been inspired by an episode of Law and Order, where a mother drowned her children and got away with an insanity defense. The defense fought back, arguing that Andrea was not a cold-blooded killer, but a woman suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. They presented medical records showing her history of hospitalizations, depression, and even previous suicide attempts. They explained that she had been prescribed Haldol, a strong antipsychotic medication, which had helped her before, but her doctor had taken her off it weeks before the murders. Her attorney described the delusions that consumed her. She believed she was a bad mother. She thought she had ruined her children's souls, and that the only way to save them was through death. She was convinced that if she let them grow up, they would burn in hell because of her failures. But the jury wasn't swayed. On March 12, 2002, after just 4 hours of deliberation, they returned a verdict: guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. For many, justice had been served. But the case was far from over. Not long after the conviction, a shocking revelation surfaced. The key witness for the prosecution, Dr. Park Dietz, had lied. The episode of Law and Order he claimed Andrea had based her crime on, it didn't exist. There was no such episode. The defense immediately challenged the verdict, arguing that Dietz's false testimony had misled the jury into believing Andrea had been calculating and manipulative. If they had known the truth, they might have seen her as a deeply disturbed woman instead of a murderer who planned her crime in advance. In 2005, the Texas Court of Appeals overturned her conviction. A new trial was ordered. Andrea's second trial began in June 2006, for years after the first. This time, the prosecution dropped the death penalty. Her defense team came armed with new evidence and stronger arguments. They presented psychiatric evaluations, medical records, and expert testimony that emphasized one thing: Andrea Yates was insane at the time of the crime. They highlighted how she had previously been hospitalized at least 5 times, how her mental illness had been severe, documented, and ignored, how her own doctor had warned Rusty that she should never be left alone with the children. The defense pointed out that Andrea had suffered from postpartum psychosis, a rare but devastating condition that causes hallucinations, delusions, and irrational thinking. She had heard voices. She believed Satan was inside her. She was convinced that killing her children was the only way to save them. On July 26, 2006, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury reached a new verdict. This time Andrea was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of prison, Andrea was sent to Kerrville State Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility. She would remain there indefinitely, receiving treatment for her severe mental illness. The ruling sparked national debate. Some believed justice had finally been served. Andrea had been mentally ill, and she needed medical care, not a prison cell. Others felt she had escaped punishment for an unforgivable crime. Even today, her case remains one of the most controversial and widely discussed legal battles in American history. Since 2006, Andrea has lived in Kerrville State Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility in Texas. Unlike a prison, it is not a place of punishment but of treatment. There are no harsh punishments or strict prison routines. Instead, she is surrounded by doctors, nurses, and other patients suffering from severe mental illness. She does not grant interviews. She does not speak to the media. Her days are quiet and structured. She takes her medication regularly, follows a daily routine, and participates in therapy. Some reports suggest that she is no longer tormented by the delusions that once consumed her, but she remains deeply remorseful. She refuses visitors, including her ex-husband, Rusty Yates, and her family. She has reportedly told her doctors that she does not deserve happiness or contact with the outside world. One of the few details that has surfaced over the years is that she spends her time crocheting blankets. She does not keep them. Instead, she donates them to a local charity for newborns in need, a quiet, almost heartbreaking attempt to do something good for children after what she had done to her own. Doctors have stated that Andrea does not want to leave Kerrville. Even though she has the right to petition for release every year, she never has. She knows she will never live a normal life again. While Andrea has spent the past 2 decades in a hospital, Rusty Yates has rebuilt his life in ways that many people never expected. In the years following the tragedy, he remained publicly supportive of Andrea. He spoke in interviews about how he never believed she was evil, only that she was a sick woman who never received the care she needed. However, public sympathy for Rusty was mixed. Many blamed him for ignoring the warning signs of Andrea's declining mental state. Doctors had advised him that she should not be left alone with the children, yet he continued to push for more children despite her struggles. By 2004, Rusty filed for divorce. In 2012, he remarried. His new wife, Laura Arnold, was 17 years younger than him. The couple started a new life together, and while Rusty rarely speaks about Andrea in public anymore, the tragedy of his first family remains an undeniable part of his past. Despite moving on, he has expressed in past interviews that he still visits Andrea occasionally, though less frequently as the years go by. The Yates case forced the world to confront a devastating reality: that severe mental illness, if left untreated, can lead to unimaginable tragedy. Before Andrea's case, postpartum psychosis was not widely understood. Many people had heard of postpartum depression, but psychosis, a condition that can cause hallucinations, delusions, and complete detachment from reality, was not something doctors and the public discussed often. After her trial, awareness began to shift. Medical professionals, lawmakers, and women's health advocates pushed for better education and policies to help mothers suffering from postpartum psychosis. Changes included better screening for postpartum mental illnesses in new mothers, more training for doctors to recognize the signs before tragedy strikes, a national conversation about the insanity defense and whether the legal system adequately protects mentally ill individuals. Andrea's not guilty by reason of insanity verdict remains one of the most high-profile cases in American legal history. Some believe it was a step forward in recognizing mental illness in the courtroom. Others still argue that a mother who drowned her 5 children should never have been allowed to avoid a prison sentence. Andrea Yates' case remains one of the most controversial and tragic criminal cases of modern times. Was justice served? For those who believe in mental health awareness, her case was a wake-up call. It forced the medical community and legal system to address postpartum psychosis as a real and dangerous condition that could lead to tragedy if left untreated. But for others, it was a failure, a case where 5 innocent children lost their lives, and their mother was never truly held accountable. Andrea Yates will likely remain in Kerrville for the rest of her life. Her children Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary never had that choice. And the question lingers. Could this tragedy have been prevented? This case has sparked debates for over 2 decades. Some believe Andrea Yates was a victim of a severe mental illness, while others argue that justice was never truly served. What do you think? Should Andrea have been sentenced to life in prison, or was the insanity verdict the right decision? Could this tragedy have been prevented? Let's discuss in the comments below. If you found this case compelling and want to hear more real-life crime stories, make sure to subscribe to Crime Stories Documentaries and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.